There's something unnerving about silence, and not just any silence, but the kind that doesn't beg to be filled, the kind that stands tall, calm, and unmoved in the face of noise. For the narcissist, that silence is unbearable, because their survival depends on reaction, attention, admiration, even if it's laced with conflict. They feed on chaos and applause, on being seen, heard, and constantly reaffirmed. But the Sigma doesn't give them that luxury. The Sigma walks away without explanation, watches without judgment, remains still while everyone else screams to be noticed. And that stillness, that absence of response, it dismantles the narcissist's entire illusion of power. Carl Jung spoke of archetypes, universal energies that live in all of us. The narcissist clings to the false self, to an inflated ego that must be admired at all costs. But the Sigma has faced their shadow. They've walked through their own darkness and come out whole. They don't need to perform, they don't need to be seen, they don't need to dominate, because they already own themselves. That's what makes them untouchable. When the ego isn't fed, it collapses. And for the narcissist, the Sigma becomes a mirror they cannot bear to look into. A mirror that reflects their emptiness, their neediness, their hunger for control. The narcissist is loud, dramatic, exhausting. The Sigma is quiet, precise, unwavering. They don't fight for attention, they are the storm that doesn't make a sound. And that's why they're more threatening than the narcissist could ever imagine. This isn't about superiority, it's about alignment, about choosing peace over power games, about knowing that silence isn't weakness, it's the highest form of strength. The Sigma doesn't need to win an argument, because they've already won something far greater: emotional sovereignty. They don't entertain manipulation, they don't flinch at passive aggression. They don't fall for the bait, and the narcissist, who thrives on reaction, is left with nothing but their own reflection. A reflection that's no longer being fed, no longer being believed, no longer being feared. That's the real threat, the realization that their influence ends where the Sigma's silence begins. Imagine this. The narcissist throws their usual bait: provocation, gaslighting, guilt-laced compliments. They expect the usual cycle to follow: defensiveness, confusion, emotional chaos. But this time, nothing happens. The Sigma doesn't flinch, doesn't argue, doesn't even blink. Just silence. No reply, no drama, just calm, measured stillness. And that moment? That absence of response? It's not just uncomfortable for the narcissist, it's catastrophic. Because nothing terrifies a narcissist more than being ignored. Narcissists feed on energy. Not just admiration, but any form of emotional supply: anger, tears, jealousy, even fear. To them, attention, positive or negative, is validation that they still have power, that they still matter. But the Sigma doesn't play that game. They don't react, they don't give access. They become emotionally invisible. And for a narcissist, being invisible is the ultimate wound. It's a mirror that reflects their irrelevance, and they can't survive in that reflection. The Sigma's silence starves the narcissist at the core of their fragile ego. While others feel the urge to explain, defend, or justify, the Sigma simply leaves the conversation. Not with words, but with energy. With a kind of detachment that doesn't scream, "I don't care," but whispers something far worse: "You no longer exist in my world." And that message cuts deeper than any insult ever could. Carl Jung said, "What you resist persists." But what happens when you don't resist at all? When you simply remove your presence? The narcissist spirals. They try harder. They become louder. They provoke more intensely. Because your silence isn't just confusing, it's a rejection of their entire identity. A direct threat to the false self they've constructed so carefully. And they'll do anything to destroy what they can't control. But the Sigma remains still, because they've already chosen peace over performance, truth over chaos. The real danger to the narcissist isn't confrontation, it's the void left when there's no one left to manipulate, no one left to perform for, no audience, no applause, just them and the silence. That's when the collapse begins, not because someone fought them, but because someone didn't need to, and that's a kind of power they never saw coming. The Sigma doesn't follow the herd not because they can't, but because they choose not to. They walk alone, not out of pride, but out of clarity. Carl Jung called it individuation, the lifelong process of becoming whole by integrating the conscious with the unconscious, the light with the shadow, the truth with the illusion. And the Sigma embodies that path. They've seen their own darkness, faced their flaws, and no longer seek approval from the outside world to validate who they are. That's what separates them from the rest. They don't need a label, a title, or a following to feel secure. They already know who they are. While others chase status, the Sigma is unmoved. They don't sit at the head of the table, but somehow the room still revolves around their presence. They're not the loudest, the most dominant, or the most visible, but people feel them. They don't compete for attention, yet they draw it effortlessly. Why? Because they operate outside the hierarchy. While the Alpha demands leadership and the Beta seeks belonging, the Sigma simply observes. They don't need to climb the social ladder, they've stepped off it completely. There's a magnetic stillness in a Sigma, the kind that makes people question themselves, the kind that doesn't boast but commands. And that silent authority shakes insecure personalities to their core, especially narcissists. Because the Sigma doesn't mirror the narcissist's desperation for control, they don't argue, chase, or submit. They remain grounded in their own world, sovereign and complete. In a society obsessed with validation, the Sigma is the glitch in the system. They don't seek to be liked, they seek to be real. And that truth carries a frequency that can't be faked. While others contort themselves to fit into expectations, the Sigma carves out their own identity, quietly, relentlessly, with precision. They're not loners because they hate people. They're selective because they understand energy. They know the cost of shallow connections and the weight of false intimacy. So they move alone not because they're broken, but because they're whole. And in that wholeness, they've become something rare, something unsettling, something untouchable. The narcissist lives inside a loop, a constant cycle of cause and effect, stimulus and response, domination and reward. Every word, every move, every calculated silence is meant to elicit something. A reaction, an emotion, a crack in your armor. And when it works, they feel powerful, in control, important. That's the echo chamber they thrive. In a world where their voice bounces off others, comes back louder, stronger, reinforced by the chaos they create. But when the Sigma enters the room, that echo chamber begins to crumble. Because the Sigma doesn't echo, they absorb, then they walk away. There's no argument, no defense, no emotional outburst, just a stillness that unnerves, a calm that exposes. And in that silence, the narcissist meets something they've spent their entire life avoiding, the sound of their own emptiness. The Sigma's refusal to validate the narcissist's game short-circuits the entire system. There is no applause, no sympathy, no emotional chaos to feed on, just stillness. And that stillness? It's more punishing than anger could ever be, because it's not passive, it's intentional. It says, you no longer have access to me. And to someone who builds their self-worth on control and manipulation, that's a death sentence. Jung warned us that we project what we refuse to confront. The narcissist projects their need for worth onto others, demanding reflection, reaction, relevance. But when the Sigma offers nothing, no mirror, no mask, no emotional dance, it forces the narcissist to face the one thing they can't bear, themselves. Suddenly, their charm doesn't work. Their guilt trips fall flat. Their drama feels like noise in an empty theater, and they don't know what to do, because their power only exists through interaction, through validation, through attention. Without that, they're just another person yelling into the void. And the Sigma? They've already left the room. This is the moment the game ends, not with a fight, but with a withdrawal. No fireworks, no vengeance, just a closed door that never reopens. And the narcissist, who once felt like the center of the story, is now just a forgotten character in a chapter that's already been turned. Because when the echo chamber shatters, all that's left is silence. And in that silence, The sigma wins without ever having to raise their voice. There's a kind of power that doesn't raise its voice, doesn't take center stage, doesn't ask for permission. It just is. That's the sigma. They don't command a room by force, they alter its frequency by presence alone. While the narcissist performs their identity like a constant audition, the sigma moves through the world without needing to prove anything. Their strength isn't theatrical, it's rooted, grounded, quietly undeniable. That's what makes it so unsettling. Carl Jung spoke of integrating the shadow, the process of facing the parts of ourselves we usually hide or deny. The sigma has done that work. They've met their fears, their insecurities, their darker impulses, and instead of rejecting them, they've absorbed them, transformed them, made peace with them. That inner reconciliation becomes their foundation. They no longer react from wounded ego. They respond from truth. And when someone stands in truth, they can't be manipulated. They can't be baited. They simply don't flinch. This is the essence of inner authority. It's not given by others. It's not earned through applause. It's born in solitude, in silence, in the decision to walk away rather than beg to be understood. The sigma doesn't need followers or fans. They don't need to be admired. They don't even need to be liked, because their sense of self isn't outsourced, it's self-sustaining. That kind of emotional independence is rare and dangerous, especially to those who depend on control. To the narcissist, who thrives on performance, this quiet power is incomprehensible. They can't understand how someone can hold so much influence without effort. They keep pressing buttons, but the sigma has disconnected the control panel. They expect conflict but receive calm. They provoke but are met with unshakable stillness. It's like trying to wrestle with air. There's nothing to grip, no foothold, no leverage, just silence that feels like steel. And that's what power truly is. Not dominance, not volume, not attention, but the ability to remain yourself in a world trying to pull you out of alignment. The sigma has that power. And they don't flaunt it, they embody it. That embodiment is the storm, not loud, but irreversible. The narcissist doesn't see you. They see a screen onto which they project their own unresolved pain, their own shame, their insecurities dressed up as superiority. When they blame you, they're avoiding their own accountability. When they guilt-trip you, they're avoiding their own emptiness. When they idealize you, they're hiding their fear of inadequacy behind fantasy. It's not about you, it was never about you. It's about the war they refuse to fight within themselves, until the sigma shows up. The sigma doesn't play along. They don't accept the projection. They don't absorb the guilt. They don't swell under flattery. They just observe, quietly, with discernment. And slowly, the narcissist's game begins to unravel. Because the sigma doesn't reflect what the narcissist needs, they reflect what the narcissist fears: reality, boundaries, the absence of control. Jung taught that what we refuse to face within becomes our shadow, and, when unexamined, we force others to carry it. That's what narcissists do. They scatter their shadow across every relationship, demanding others to feel what they won't. But when that energy hits the sigma, it falls flat. There's no emotional entanglement, no reaction, no hook, just a mirror that doesn't lie. That's when the collapse begins. Subtle at first: confusion, agitation, desperate attempts to regain control. But over time, the narcissist starts to see the cracks in their own illusion. Because without a willing participant, the story falls apart. And the sigma, they just keep walking, unbothered, untouched, not as an act of revenge but as a natural result of clarity. The narcissist is left alone with the very reflection they've avoided for years: the neediness, the insecurity, the hollow identity built on image and manipulation. And for someone who's never been forced to look inward, that kind of silence is unbearable. The sigma didn't fight, didn't accuse, didn't expose. They just stepped out of the role the narcissist wrote for them, and in doing so dismantled the entire script. Because when projection meets neutrality, it collapses. When manipulation meets self-awareness, it dissolves. When ego meets authenticity, it has no place to stand. That's why the Sigma is more dangerous than the narcissist ever imagined, not because they fight back, but because they no longer give the fight a stage. When a narcissist realizes their grip is slipping, panic sets in. Not always with screaming or dramatic outbursts, though that comes too, but with desperation masked as charm, confusion dressed up as concern, and when all else fails, rage cloaked in righteousness. The moment their tactics no longer yield a reaction, their mask begins to crack, because control is everything to them. It's not about connection, it's about domination. And when the Sigma doesn't flinch, doesn't chase, doesn't explain, that's when the narcissist starts to unravel. At first, they test. A subtle dig here, a guilt trip there. They expect to see the usual signs, a defensive explanation, a wounded response, maybe even a tear, but the Sigma remains still. Emotionally present, yet detached, not cold, just clear. And that clarity infuriates the narcissist, because clarity is immune to confusion. And without confusion, their manipulation has no ground to stand on. What the narcissist doesn't understand is that emotional withdrawal isn't a weakness, it's a decision, a boundary, a line that's been drawn, not in anger, but in power. The Sigma doesn't storm out for effect, they exit in silence. And that exit echoes louder than any confrontation ever could, because it says, without words, you no longer have access to my peace. That silence is unbearable. It forces the narcissist to sit with themselves without an audience, without control, without anyone to dance to their chaos. And that's when the rage ignites. Not because they're hurt, but because they've been denied. Their control has been revoked, their influence dissolved. They lash out not to win but to be seen, but the Sigma doesn't respond. Because they know that real power doesn't announce itself. It simply removes itself. And in that removal, the narcissist is left with the one thing they fear most, their own reflection. No one to blame, no one to punish, no one to guilt into staying. Just the silence of a room they no longer control. And that silence is where the Sigma thrives. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." That's not just philosophy, it's a psychological truth the narcissist refuses to face. Because to face it would mean accepting the uncomfortable reality that what they reject in others is exactly what they deny in themselves. And the Sigma? They're not just a person, they're a mirror. A walking reflection of everything the narcissist pretends not to be, and everything they secretly wish they were. The Sigma's calm feels like an attack. Their boundaries feel like betrayal. Their silence feels like punishment. But in reality, none of it is about the narcissist. That's the part they can't tolerate. The Sigma doesn't orbit them, doesn't cater to them, doesn't need them. And that autonomy forces the narcissist to feel something foreign and terrifying, powerlessness. The Sigma reflects back the narcissist's unhealed wounds, not intentionally but inevitably. Because when someone is whole, those living in fragments can't help but feel their own fractures. The narcissist calls the Sigma cold, arrogant, distant, but that's projection. What they're really saying is, I don't know how to reach you and that scares me. Because when someone can't be manipulated, they become a threat, not because they attack, but because they reflect. And this mirror doesn't distort, it doesn't lie, it doesn't flatter, it just reveals. The narcissist sees a person who doesn't need external validation, who isn't afraid of solitude, who operates from truth rather than ego, and it stings. Because deep down they know that's what real strength looks like, and it's a strength they've never built within themselves. The more the narcissist tries to provoke, the more they see their efforts fail. And with every failed attempt, the mirror becomes clearer. Not only can they not break the Sigma, they can't even touch them. And that realization becomes unbearable. The Sigma didn't come to fight, they came to reflect. And that reflection, clean and calm, is what burns the most. Not because it wounds, but because it reveals. Because it whispers the one truth the narcissist cannot escape. The problem was never them, it was always you. There's a moment the narcissist dreads more than any confrontation, any insult, any verbal retaliation. It's not the scream, it's the silence. That weighted pause, that unshaken stillness, the kind that doesn't ask for attention, doesn't explain itself, doesn't chase clarity, and when that silence comes from a sigma, it isn't emptiness, it's a message, a boundary, a final word without ever needing to be spoken. Because sometimes, the most deafening answer is the one that never leaves your lips. The narcissist thrives on noise arguments, drama, long-winded texts, emotional pleas. That noise validates them, confirms their importance. But the sigma doesn't feed that machine. They don't get pulled into circular conversations. They don't correct distortions or defend against fabricated guilt. They simply stop. No energy wasted. No effort to be understood by someone committed to misunderstanding them. Just silence and presence. The kind of presence that says, I see everything, and I choose peace anyway. This silence isn't passive, it's precise. It comes after the sigma has read the room, decoded the manipulation, and realized no response is the response. It disarms the narcissist completely. Because manipulation requires participation, and when the sigma doesn't respond, the game has nowhere to go. The narcissist starts reaching, flailing, escalating. But the sigma? Still. Centered. Done. What makes that silence so unbearable is its clarity. It strips away the narcissist's illusion of control. Every tactic ignored, every bait tune bitten, every attempt to reclaim power met with nothing but still air. That's when the narcissist starts unraveling. Because they realize the power dynamic has shifted. They're shouting into a void that no longer echoes back. In a world where noise is often mistaken for strength, the sigma redefines what real power looks like. It doesn't fight to be heard. It doesn't demand attention. It simply removes itself and lets the silence speak. And what that silence says, without fail, is this: you no longer have access to me. You can't manipulate someone who no longer needs your approval. You can't guilt-trip someone who's not afraid of walking alone. That's the sigma's fortress, not walls built out of fear, but boundaries forged in self-respect. While the narcissist tries to pick the emotional lock with charm, pity, or pressure, the sigma doesn't even open the door. Not because they're closed off, but because they've learned who's safe to let in, and who brings chaos in disguise. Emotional autonomy is the sigma's armor. They've felt the sting of betrayal, the weight of gaslighting, the emptiness of shallow connections. And instead of becoming bitter, they became precise. They stopped explaining themselves to those who twist truth. They stopped overgiving to those who only take. They stopped chasing closeness with people who confuse attachment for intimacy. That's not coldness, that's clarity. And in that clarity, they built something the narcissist can't touch: sovereignty. The narcissist needs emotional access. They survive on it. They probe, poke, and provoke, searching for that soft spot to exploit. But with the sigma, that access is gone, not in anger, not in revenge, but in quiet detachment. The sigma doesn't match chaos with chaos. They don't fight for dominance in a game they never agreed to play. They just don't show up. And that absence, that refusal to engage, is more powerful than any retaliation. Carl Jung spoke of the fully individuated cell phone who is not ruled by the need for external validation, but guided by inner truth. That's the sigma. They know their worth doesn't hinge on how others treat them. So when manipulation knocks, they don't answer. When control tactics flare, they don't react. They protect their energy like it's sacred because it is. To the narcissist, this is intolerable. Not only can they not control the sigma, they can't even trigger them. And that emotional impenetrability becomes the narcissist's undoing. Because they weren't prepared for someone who doesn't flinch, who doesn't crack, who doesn't need them. The sigma doesn't need to prove anything. Their peace is proof enough, and when you can't be pulled into the storm, you become the calm that makes others question their chaos. That's the fortress. That's the freedom. And that's why the narcissist, for all their noise, is rendered powerless in its shadow. Being authentic in a world built on masks is not without consequence. The sigma knows this well. They've paid for their truth in silence, in distance, in being called too much or too cold. Because when you stop playing the game, when you stop performing, pleasing, apologizing for existing, you don't just lose people, you lose illusions. And the price of that loss is isolation. But what comes in return is something no one can give you and no one can take away: freedom. The Sigma has felt it. That sharp shift when they stopped shrinking themselves for comfort, when they chose self-respect over social acceptance, when they stopped entertaining connections that only drained, distorted, or demanded too much. People pulled away, or worse, turned against them. Not because the Sigma did anything wrong, but because they stopped being controllable. That's the part most won't admit. When your authenticity threatens their illusion, they'll call it arrogance. When your silence exposes their noise, they'll label you cold. And when your peace can't be shaken, they'll try to convince others it's fake. But the Sigma doesn't flinch, because they've already grieved the cost. They've sat with the loneliness. They've walked through the wilderness of disconnection. And what they found on the other side wasn't bitterness, it was clarity. It was the realization that belonging means nothing if it costs you yourself. That being understood by the wrong people is more dangerous than being misunderstood by everyone. Carl Jung taught that individuation is the path to wholeness. But what he didn't sugarcoat is that this path often leads away from the crowd. The Sigma doesn't fear this anymore, because they know the most sacred space is the one they build within themselves. And while they might stand alone, they never stand empty. Their solitude isn't a punishment, it's a sanctuary. A place where nothing has to be earned and nothing has to be explained. So yes, authenticity has a price. It always has. But the Sigma paid it willingly. And what they bought was something the narcissist can never counterfeit: a life that belongs to them and no one else. When the Sigma goes no contact, it's not a game. It's not manipulation. It's a final, grounded decision made after every attempt at mutual respect has failed. And for the narcissist, that kind of exit is more than painful, it's catastrophic, because it strips away their most vital resource: access. Without access, there's no control, no emotional supply, no fuel to feed their fragile ego. And suddenly the one person who used to dance with their chaos is gone. No contact isn't silence, it's closure. It's the act of reclaiming your energy, your space, your power. It's saying, this door isn't just closed, it's sealed. And what makes it so threatening to the narcissist is that it offers them no foothold, no room for persuasion, no platform for their performance. They text, no reply. They call, no answer. They show up, hoping for reaction, but the Sigma has already disappeared, not in body but in presence, in willingness, in emotional access. The narcissist doesn't miss you, they miss their control over you. They miss being able to pull strings, twist words, provoke a reaction. But now, there's nothing, just the echo of their own manipulation. That's the part they can't handle, not being blocked, but being irrelevant. Because as long as they still mattered, there was hope. As long as you still responded, they had leverage. But now, they're locked out. And worse, they know it's permanent. Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. The Sigma has made that unconscious pain conscious. They've seen the loop, traced the pattern, and cut the cord. No contact isn't just silence, it's awakening. And awakening is irreversible. That's why it's the ultimate threat. Because confrontation can be argued. Conflict can be spun. But indifference, detachment, emotional inaccessibility, that can't be faked and it can't be undone. It leaves the narcissist facing the one thing they're least equipped to deal with: their own powerlessness. And the Sigma? They don't look back. Because when you've tasted peace, chaos becomes unacceptable. No contact isn't revenge, it's rebirth. It's the clean break that says, this chapter is over, and I've finally remembered who I am. For most, betrayal is a wound that festers. For the Sigma, it becomes fuel. Not because they're immune to pain, but because they know how to alchemize it. Where others collapse under the weight of deception, the Sigma begins the transformation. They don't ignore the hurt, they sit with it, they study it, and in that stillness, something shifts. The pain becomes a teacher, the betrayal becomes a mirror, and what was meant to break them instead carves out something unshakable: self-mastery. The Sigma doesn't seek closure from the betrayer, they find it within themselves, because they've walked this path before, and every time they come back sharper, quieter, more rooted in who they are. That's the difference. Where the narcissist manipulates to gain control, the Sigma detaches to gain clarity. They don't stay to prove a point. They walk away to protect their peace. And that detachment, far from being cold, is sacred. It's the space in which they evolve. Carl Jung spoke of individuation as the journey toward becoming whole. But wholeness doesn't come from comfort. It comes from collapse, from having your illusions shattered and still choosing not to close your heart, from losing people you thought you needed and realizing you were the one you were waiting for. That's the Sigma's evolution. Each betrayal breaks the outer shell, and what remains is essence, truth, sovereignty. They don't waste time on revenge. They don't spiral into victimhood. They risen not to prove anything, but because falling would mean betraying themselves. And that's a line they no longer cross. So, while the narcissist plays the same tired game, expecting a familiar reaction, the Sigma is already gone, growing, healing, becoming, detached not out of indifference, but out of awareness. Because once you've seen what manipulation really looks like, you don't unsee it, you simply evolve beyond it. And in that evolution, the Sigma becomes untouchable, no because they've hardened, but because they've remembered who they are without the noise. The narcissist's entire identity rests on illusion of control, illusion of importance, illusion of being irreplaceable. They wear the mask well, confident, charming, even magnetic at times. But it's all smoke, all show. And it only works as long as someone else believes it. The moment that belief dies, so does the fantasy. And the Sigma? They don't believe in illusions. They see through them, quietly, precisely, without needing to say a word. That's when it starts to crumble, not in an explosion, but in erosion. The narcissist watches their influence shrink, their tactics fall flat, their drama goes unanswered. And the worst part? The Sigma doesn't even seem angry. They just stop engaging, stop caring, stop showing up. And that disinterest is what truly kills the narcissist's fantasy, because their power depends on your reaction. And when the Sigma gives them nothing, no defense, no tears, no chaseate, forces a reckoning. The narcissist can't process this kind of ending. They expect closure, conflict, maybe even revenge. But the Sigma offers none. They simply vanish physically, emotionally, energetically. Not to be dramatic, but because they're done. Not pretending to be done. Not testing the waters. Truly, deeply, unshakably done. And that quiet exit hits harder than any confrontation ever could. Jung said, "We meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life." The narcissist has spent a lifetime avoiding that meeting, but the Sigma's silence forces the mirror in front of them. There's no one left to blame, no one left to control, no one left to perform for. Just the truth, echoing back. It was all a performance. And now, the audience is gone. That's how the fantasy dies, not with a scream, but with a whisper, with absence, with the calm certainty of someone who doesn't need closure because they've already outgrown the story. The Sigma doesn't need the last word. They don't need justice. Their peace is the justice. Their silence is the ending. Their absence is the message. And while the narcissist scrambles to reassemble their broken image, the Sigma is already miles away, not running, not hiding, but walking into the next chapter of their life. Lighter, freer, finally whole. In a world built on noise, silence is rebellion, not the passive kind, not silence born of fear, but the grounded stillness that comes from knowing exactly who you are. The Sigma doesn't raise their voice to prove their worth. They don't shout to be seen. They don't dominate to feel powerful. Instead, they challenge the entire structure of toxic power dynamics by doing the one thing narcissists and manipulators can't comprehend. They stay silent and walk away. Because in a society that rewards control, loudness, and constant validation seeking, choosing not to engage is radical. Choosing not to argue, not to perform, not to react, that's strength. That's sovereignty. The Sigma doesn't just survive toxic systems, they rewrite the script. They dismantle the very mechanisms that keep others entangled in roles of victim and villain. And they do it all without raising a single hand. Just presence, just boundaries, just silence. This kind of strength terrifies those who depend on power imbalances to feel secure. The narcissist can manipulate someone who doubts themselves, but not someone who no longer needs the world's permission to exist. The Sigma's refusal to play the game is more than self-preservation, it's revolution, a quiet, internal uprising that says, I choose peace over control, truth over illusion, me over approval. Carl Jung understood that we must confront what we've repressed to become whole. The Sigma has done that. And in doing so, they no longer bend to please or contort to fit. They expand fully, freely, fiercely. Their silence is not an absence of power, it is the very expression of it. And in a world that expects performance, their calm becomes a mirror that exposes all the noise for what it really is: fear, dressed up as dominance. So when the Sigma stays silent, they're not retreating, they're reclaiming. And in that reclamation, they become something few ever dare to be: untouchable without becoming hard, powerful without becoming loud. A quiet revolution that changes everything starting from within. There comes a moment, quiet, personal, absolute, when you stop explaining yourself. When you stop shrinking to fit broken systems. When you stop waiting for someone else to validate your worth. That moment is the beginning of your Sigma path. It doesn't require a dramatic exit or a viral speech, just a decision: I choose me. And from that place, everything begins to shift. The Sigma isn't born from ease. They are forged in silence, betrayal, clarity. They've been tested, stretched, misjudged. But they didn't break, they refined. They didn't explode, they evolved. And now, they move with the weight of someone who knows their value, doesn't rise or fall with anyone's opinion. That's the storm. The quiet force that arrives without announcement and leaves everything transformed. You don't have to be loud to be powerful. You don't have to fight to win. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is not answer the call, not open the door, not engage with what no longer aligns. That's the lesson, that's the invitation. Step into the storm, not the one that rages outside, but the one you carry within, the one that says, I will never abandon myself again. Carl Jung once said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. That's the Sigma journey, not imitation, not rebellion for the sake of rebellion, but becoming, fully, authentically, without compromise. It's not about being better than anyone. It's about being free from everything that kept you small. So, if you've ever walked away without explanation, if you've ever chosen silence instead of battle, if you've ever outgrown the game entirely, then you already know the power of this path. And if you're just starting it, let this be your reminder. The quietest voice inside you is often the strongest. Trust it. Drop a comment if you've ever gone silent and found your strength in it. Share your story, because somewhere, someone else needs that courage right now. If this resonated with you, like, subscribe, and keep walking your truth. No noise, no performance, just presence. Because the storm they never saw coming is you. This story was intense, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.